All right, welcome everybody. I'm so happy to be here with my friend Michelle. Mish. I'm so excited for the next hour. It's going to be amazing. But before we get started, I got too excited clearly already. I do want to start by acknowledging that we are here on the unceded stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and that in our work, we try to be good guests on these lands. And I'm happy to have Michelle here. Mish, actually, I do want to start by telling people a little story about how we met. I met Michelle on the very first day of grad school, and I spotted Mish, and for some reason, I knew. I was like, this one is going to be my friend. And somehow I weaved myself in her life, and it's been since 2016. We went to school together. And let me tell you, when you go through hard things with people, you form a strong bond. So this is a little bit of my story with Michelle. And I did want to start this interview a little bit differently because Michelle is my friend. So I do want to acknowledge that. And thank you for being here.
Wow.
Mish, do you want to introduce yourself?
I mean, thanks for having me.
Anytime.
And I would say that my initial reaction on the first day of school was probably the same. It's like, this person seems really cool. I want to be friends with them. So it's kind of crazy to think that it's been 7 years.
Oh, shit.
Maybe longer. No, 7 years.
7.
That's
right.
amazing.
We can do math.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I guess I can introduce myself.
Please.
Michelle, or Mish. I have lived in so-called Vancouver for the last 7 years. Well, I guess West Coast.
Right.
Vancouver and Seattle, kind of back and forth for the last 7 years. I'm originally from Montreal. I am a landscape designer based in Vancouver. And I'm also so many other things, I guess. I'm a daughter and sister and friend and community member, neighbor, all the things.
Absolutely. I think you are quite a unique community member, which is something that I want to get into later in our discussion. But before we do that, I want to talk about our experience in school because because I think it's really important for people who are going through grad school in design and how difficult that can be. People who have left grad school in design and trying to recover from the trauma of it all. So I want to start by asking you, it's been 4 years, 3 years since?
Yeah, 4.
4.
4 for
4
me.
years since you've been out of Sala. And just, do you feel like you've healed from the trauma of grad school?
No. I mean, in some ways, yes, but I feel like I'm still dealing with a lot of like really not so great learned behavior that I developed in school, which is kind of unfortunate. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say I've healed from it just yet. I think it still comes a lot in waves. I think like all the things of perfectionism and work-life balance and never feeling like you're good enough.
Right.
Like there's nobody critiquing me anymore, but I've definitely like developed my own inner critic.
Right.
In a way that like probably existed before grad school, but like it definitely got much worse.
100%.
In grad school. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember actually the first time that I was asked to design a project on my own. Oh, I actually had a complete panic attack because I like grad school was so You see, this is the
Yeah.
trouble. I cannot speak.
Yeah. No, really, yeah.
And I don't lose my words a lot.
No.
But it was so good at getting to your self-esteem and making you feel like you weren't good enough, that like all those feelings came back. And so you would think that the space that was supposed to train us to be designers, actually the culture that it created compromised our ability to be creative.
Yeah. 100%.
Which is really unfortunate. And so this is really difficult for us to talk about because, I mean, we're friends, so we know how hard the things we went through were.
Mm-hmm.
And not that this is necessarily the right format and space to unpack that, but I think it's really important for people who are going through that to know that they're not alone, that it's not okay for anybody who's in academia. It is not okay.
Yeah.
There is nothing that justifies seeing people suffer for a project.
No. And like, I was thinking about that this morning, actually, how like, if you see a toxic pattern in a friendship or in a partnership or in a family, you're going to try and break that pattern. And especially if it's like a cyclical thing, like, oh, like this happened to my parents and they did that to me. And so now I see myself doing that. I'm going to stop it here. And I feel like architecture, like the school and like the way that we teach this particular program, like is kind of toxic. And like the idea, like the professors will say like, well, we went through that.
Mm-hmm.
We survived, so we can keep doing it. And it's like, but we could just break the pattern and just do something completely different. And I don't understand why we just keep feeling the need to perpetuate this unfortunate feeling. And then we see it in firms and it kind of just like trickles down.
Totally. I think it's because people who are instructors and people who are in those spaces never healed. So they're just perpetuating the cycle.
Yeah.
And it's really bad. I mean, one of the reasons why I really wanted to teach is because, yeah, sure, I care a lot about the subject that I teach, but I care more about how I show up in those spaces because I'm like, I will not do what some people did to me.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Things about to get real. Do you remember that one prof who straight up told me, I don't think you should be in landscape architecture.
Oh, yeah. I do.
Guys.
Like, can we not do that to people? And like, you're basing this off of like a year or two of knowing somebody. When
No, actually, about a few weeks.
Right.
That was first year.
And when you start working, you learn that like, actually you still don't know anything. And like, you're still going to be learning because this is a lifelong profession, which they don't talk about in school.
Absolutely.
But like, you never stop learning. So for anyone to base whether or not you're going to be a good designer 4 weeks in is insane.
Yeah. Not only is it crazy, but also it's also very discriminatory.
Yeah.
Like the way that I was treated was very bad. And so maybe we'll have a different conversation where we really unpack this a little bit more because I don't want to spend the whole time doing this. But what are some of the ways that you've tried to reclaim your agency and redefine like what design, what landscape architecture and landscape design is for you?
That's a really good question. I think since being done school, work-life balance has just become very important to me. So I just like, I'm not interested in spending more than the required amount of time that I have to like do my job and not go beyond that. Because I think that like rest and care for myself and care for my community is 1,000 times more important than like that than doing the design work. And I think that by tending to those things, it will make me a better designer. And like, we didn't ever consider that in school. In school, it was like, you're supposed to sleep under your desk and like never leave and have no balance, which felt so strange to me at the time. I feel like that's maybe the biggest thing. And then I mean, we've explored this, but I've tried to like counter my perfectionism through activities and a lot of somatic things and non-dominant hand drawing to just try and get used to the fact that like things don't go as planned and that's okay. And like we've got to squash that inner critic because your non-dominant hand is going to do whatever it wants to do. And you have to let go. Yeah, I feel like those have been like the two most important practices. And then just trying to invest in building strong relationships with the people around me who I love, but also my greater community. Because I feel like at the end of the day, like landscape design is all about community. And so often like we separate those things.
Totally.
So yeah, I feel like that's been a bigger focus in the last few years is just trying to figure out like who I am as a community member and how my profession might maybe tie in to these forces at play to help build stronger networks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do want to say Michelle is very humble and isn't saying that she's been doing quite a lot of work, doing mutual aids, working with the unhoused communities in Vancouver and Seattle, and really trying to bring landscape architecture into the world and make it accessible and actually make it serve communities that landscape architecture has historically oppressed within its practice and its discourse. So obviously, I want to talk about that.
Right.
I want to talk about how did you get into, because I know during the pandemic is when you started to do a lot of mutual aid.
Yeah.
So, and really understanding like how important open spaces are for housing
Yeah.
people, for housing different kins. Like, so can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Just about like that journey.
Talk about the journey and it really anything surrounding that, just because I think it's a very unique way to practice.
Yeah. Okay. So when the pandemic had started, school just ended for me like a couple of months before that, and I left school feeling like completely depleted and drained, and all of the things that we were just talking about. And I wasn't working because I was in America under like a visa that just let me exist in that country. A little bit of a complicated situation, which is a story for another day.
Might take a few days.
Honestly. But yeah, I was in Seattle when the pandemic hit, and I felt really called to do something because I was unemployed and feeling like I needed to contribute and kind of feeling restless about what was going on and acknowledging that like I was in a place of position where I could help. And so I think I just had signed up for like, there was an Excel sheet where people were posting whether or not they needed groceries delivered to them because they were vulnerable or for whatever reason they couldn't access groceries. And so I started just doing those kinds of runs. I would like drive to different places and deliver groceries. And that was just kind of like kind of an interesting experience because it was maybe the first time that I realized there was a bit of a bubble that burst that like, yes, we have organizations and groups in place to try and help communities, but at the same time, these organizations don't always catch everybody. And so at some point I was delivering groceries to like an undocumented family who couldn't access a food bank because they didn't have the proper ID to get access to food. And it was like, oh, wow. So like the system doesn't work for everyone. Cool. And like we're in a crisis right now. So like community literally has to come together. Otherwise people will die or not survive. And then I guess the George Floyd protests happened that summer, and I was Canadian citizen, so I had to be very careful with how active I was, but I was there as long as I could be. And CHOP/CHAZ became a thing where like there was this kind of autonomous area that people were camping at. And at first it was protesters, but eventually unhoused folks started moving in. And one of my friends and I started delivering soup there just to support the community. Then that got swept, and we started delivering soup to a more local space to where my friend was living and where I was living at the time. And it was just down the block. There was this park that about 50 people were living at. And at first we started just bringing down extra soup, like we'd make enough for the family and then bring some down. And then it started becoming like, no, we're going to make 20 things of soup. Okay, now we're going to make 40, 50, 60. Then we started figuring out like how to get the to-go cups and how to transport things. And then the more you build connections with people, it was like, oh, this person's tent has a hole in it. Let's go find them another tent. Oh, this person like needs to sleep in a hotel tonight because it's snowing and he's very vulnerable. Let's figure it out. And it just kind of like turned into this whole thing that I guess I had never personally experienced before, where so often it's like, well, you just give money to an organization and like they'll take care of it. And it was like, no, this is like just direct action in the community that like I'm doing this because they're my neighbor.
Yeah.
And then I moved back to Vancouver and I wanted to continue that work. And yeah, I guess I've been pretty involved at Crab Park doing mostly the same thing. But I think that because I've developed a strong relationship with that community, landscape design has kind of like come into play with that, which has been really cool and interesting. But I'm helping to get funds and trying to get grants, and we built a community garden this summer, which was like the coolest thing to kind of see like my two worlds combine.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
It's amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been a really like amazing, cool journey, and it's taught me so much about the importance of community care for like my own well-being. Yeah, like I guess it's been a really beautiful thing to witness and be a part of, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah.
All right, I just want to take a moment to thank the Real Estate Foundation of BC for sponsoring this episode of Design Unmuted. The Real Estate Foundation of BC is a philanthropic organization working to advance sustainable land use and real estate practices in British Columbia. They do this by funding projects, connecting people, and sharing knowledge. Their grants support not-for-profit organizations working to improve BC communities and natural environments through responsible and informed land use, conservation, and real estate practices. They're particularly interested in land use projects that contribute to the upholding of Indigenous rights and title and racial equity and justice. You can learn more at www.refbc.com. Thank you for your support of Design Unmuted. Now, let's get back to it.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions for you right now, but I want to start with you talking about your experience, because there's so many negative perceptions of the unhoused community, and people actually actively go out of their way to avoid contact, to avoid any relationship building, which essentially is dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And so I just want to, could you talk a little bit more about if perhaps even before your journey, before building these relationships, if there was any blockages and how you maybe overcame that, and just your journey into actually arriving here and becoming like real homies with the homies, you know?
Homies with the homies. Yeah. I've always been a shy-ish person, but I am extroverted. Just like a weird paradigm. But I think I was kind of nervous. But at the time that I started doing this, I was with a friend who is like extremely like talkative and charismatic and amazing. And she taught me so much about like how to speak to people and approach them and like learn their names and like learn them in a way that like you'll remember them. And she would just like kind of go up to a tent and just be like, hey, is anyone home? Do you want anything to eat? Do you need anything? And it just looked so easy that I started doing it. And now I feel very comfortable with that. But I will be the first to admit that that is a very intimidating thing. So like anyone starting out mutual aid, I'm always like, know what your limits are. Like if you're somebody that is not extroverted or like doesn't or socially anxious or feels like they can't approach people, that's okay. But there are other ways to like be involved where you're not necessarily directly engaging with the homies.
Yeah.
Like, I can go deliver the soup, but do you want to cook the soup?
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, before we kind of go on, could you define what mutual aid is? Because I think there's a lot of people who don't actually understand what that is.
Yeah. So this is like it's a term that's been kind of going around for the last 5 years, probably since the pandemic, but I would be remiss without saying that like this has existed. Like it's not a new thing. It is like a thing that communities have been doing, especially marginalized communities have been doing since time immemorial. It's just that we live in a white supremacist world and we need to coin terms for everything. So that's what that is. But mutual aid comes from a book. Well, somebody wrote about it. That's how I learned about it.
Okay.
It was a book written by Dean Spade. It's called Mutual Aid. And they just really break down this idea of how capitalism has led to us being less invested in community. So instead of directly engaging with our neighbors to see what they need, we've been taught to like send money to organizations and to nonprofits and that they'll take care of it. And like it kind of just goes out there. But by doing that, it's created a separation between us and like causes or things that are happening directly in our own neighborhood. And mutual aid is the idea that like we don't use this middleman, that you just engage directly with community in whatever capacity fits right for you, because everyone has special skills, knowledge, whatever it may be. So how can you directly contribute to your community in a time of crisis like the pandemic, or when we're dealing with severe houselessness, or during climate change events? And it's not a new term, but it is starting to like pick up a little bit in terms of its popularity and people's understanding of it, that like you don't need, I mean, you can give your money to an organization. And it's not to say that nonprofits aren't doing important work. They are. But also, as individuals, like we have more agency than we think we do.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that relationship building piece is so key, because it's just about recognizing the humanity in people going through poverty.
Yeah.
Poverty is not a crime.
No, exactly.
I've never freaking understood why people criminalize poverty so much, especially when it's a system that creates this.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah.
You can create this problem and then turn around and then pretend like, oh.
I'm loving this.
It's the mission divine combo.
Yeah.
But just like these things really get me riled up because it's really unfair.
Yes. I don't know. I feel like we have so much more in common than we think we do. Like, it might just like, I feel like, I don't know, like I have my own issues with mental health and like I've had financial hardship in the past. I'm just lucky enough to have like a family and a group of people behind me that like can help if things were to get really bad. But like that's just not the case for some people. And that's the like number one thing that I've learned. Like most folks like just like there are so many commonalities in all of our stories, and it's just like recognizing the humanity in one another. And like I don't know, I'm sad that like people are kind of nervous to engage with the community in the downtown east side, because like it's the richest community I have ever witnessed like in my entire existence of being in Canada or North America for that matter. Like everyone knows everyone uplifts one another, and like yes, there are issues with substance abuse, and like yes, there are mental health issues, but like it's a really like safe and beautiful, rich place that doesn't really exist anywhere else.
Actually, now that we're talking about Crab Park, I'm wondering if you could talk about the recent garden that you installed, and also take that opportunity to also talk about the history of Crab Park, because Crab Park also, from its inception, it is a space for more and for hosting. So could you tell us more?
Crab Park is a very interesting place in Vancouver. It started off as Indigenous land and continues to be Indigenous land. But the Port Authority had control over it for a really long time. And in the 80s, a group of residents in the downtown east side basically made the call for, like, we don't have access to a beach. We don't have access to any waterfront, but like all these other places in Vancouver do. This isn't right. And a group of Indigenous community members basically camped at what we know today as Crab Park. And I forget how long they camped there for, but long enough that the city took notice and the Port Authority took notice. And they ultimately decided to turn this land into a park. And CRAB, the name CRAB is actually an acronym for Create a Real Beach, which is kind of cool.
Cool.
Yeah. And CRAB today, as we know it, is a site where I think this number fluctuates, but I want to say between 50 and 60, that number's maybe a little bit higher right now. Folks are living down there. So we've about that many residents. They've been there for about 2 years. A number of them came from Strathcona Park, which was the encampment that was kind of previously in Vancouver, and that got swept in 2021. People moved down to Crab, and they are legally protected there right now, which is amazing. There's the whole, I don't know if I should
That's
get,
a result.
get into the court case a little bit or explain that.
I think absolutely. I think we should talk about how a park because you are aware of the process that took place so that people could be there now in more safe way and more secure way than before.
Yeah.
So if you could talk about that, because I think it's really important for people to understand that these things are possible.
Yeah. Well, I think Crab Park is really interesting, I guess, because it's kind of legally protected and the organizing that went into that. It's something that I haven't seen before, and in the research that I've done for other encampments, like this is was a new strategy. So when people were kicked out of Strathcona, a couple of months later, they were at Crab, and then the city was starting to go through this process again of trying to get people out of that park. And some housed community members decided to organize with the folks that were living there and basically had legal observers come every day and keep track of how the city was managing all of this, keeping track of what they were saying to residents, what was the strategy to get them out. And so often they would say, like, we need you to get out of here. We are offering shelter. And that's how they could justify getting people out. And then in reality, and this is what the court case proved, was like, there were no shelters for them. There was no place for them to go. And so the judge ruled in the favor of residents because the judge was basically like, yeah, they have literally nowhere else to go. The lawyers have proved this. So in the meantime, until you figure it out, they can stay at Crab. And it's been 2 years that they've been there protected, which is amazing.
Yeah, for real.
That's not to say like we're getting a little nervous these days that they're going to try and pull something. But for now, like this was a victory. There are so many other things like the city could be doing, and there's so much more work to be done. But like, that's a very small win. That is amazing. And it's kind of nice to like not be constantly concerned about the fear of a sweep, at least in this one space.
Right.
But yeah, the community organizing and the legal organizing was a really interesting thing. That's not something that I've seen in my experiences in Seattle and other parts of Vancouver. Usually it's kind of like we just brace ourselves for a sweep and you feel like you can't really fight it. Yeah. And this was kind of, I don't know, an interesting way of like, how do we do this within the system?
Right. And the legal team, they essentially were doing this pro bono? Yeah. Right. So this is also mutual aid in like in all kind of like facets to be able to do this.
Yep. Yeah, they were doing this pro bono, continue to like do this pro bono. It's amazing. They work so hard. They're an amazing group of people.
Yeah, this is such a good reminder to not underestimate like the power of community. Like we can do things, and like these things are possible, and it's really great. Yeah. And so as a result of that, the community was able to to stay and like formalize a little bit more.
Yep.
And so,
Yeah.
and I guess this is where the garden
Yeah.
came about. And I'm really
Yeah.
excited for you to share about
Oh my
that whole
gosh.
process.
Yeah. Well, I guess, yes. So because things are more stable, because we're not worried about the threat of a sweep, we've been able to kind of build other spaces. And so there's like a community kitchen, there's a community warming tent. And last, I guess, winter, early spring, there were talks about how folks wanted to start growing things. And I was really excited about that because, like, I kind of know how to grow things. And I, like, happened to go to school to do that.
To design the things.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, I started engaging with community members. It was mostly like one or two people, mostly one, Crystal. She just like had it in her head that she wanted to have this garden this summer, and we figured it out. It ended up being like a lot of trial and error, and like very much like there's a whole design process and things don't go as planned. And, you know, it's kind of hard to like plan with community when like community's not always there. And, yeah, trying to source materials and do things at a low cost. But yeah, now we've got a very cute Indigenous medicinal garden.
Bravo.
Still thriving. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So proud of you, man.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, that was one of my more exciting moments of this year, 2023. Yeah, it was really cool. We built it out of cinder blocks, which I've since learned is like maybe not the best building material for a garden because it's hot. Creates a microclimate. But like the cinder blocks were fun because people got to paint them and then we got to like build a little structure, and it created a bit of a wall so people like really didn't mess with it, which was cool. Yeah, and we got a lot of plant donations and people were like pretty on board. Like even the city was like not fighting that, which was cool. I thought they would.
Yeah, we all thought.
I was so nervous. But yeah, they were cool with it. So yeah, I guess like gardens kind of, well, they can get really political actually, but like.
But it's like they're perceived as like pacifiers.
Yeah.
So it's easier to, right. But I'm also interested to know, because you work as a landscape designer right now, so there's a process that we go through in design and a certain timeline, certain tools.
Yeah.
How different was that process when you were designing in community, with community, and directly for community who were going to not only build but also maintain and sustain the space?
Yeah, I mean, well, picking a site was interesting because like I was thinking about things like maybe we would want it close to water, like maybe close so that people who are walking by the encampment can see it. And the community was like, no, we want it like in the park, like in the camp. It's like, okay, all right, cool. But like that was already like, I had assumptions about how it would go. And then I learned like, no, actually like they have different needs and wants and ideas about where this could go. And then...
and what was the reason for that?
I think that they could keep an eye on it. I think that was the big thing. And then Crystal kept saying like, it'll be so nice for, because like the park looks over the, where all the cruise ships are.
Yeah.
And she would say like, oh, it'll be so nice for them to see this garden. Like, we're not so bad. Like, I think she like thought it would change their perception of them. I'm trying to think what else about the design process. I guess
in terms of like even like the drawing, like did you even go through like do you need to do a drawing set, or is it more like right?
No, I don't like. I mean, I guess you could do a drawing set, and I did draw something out because like at first I was like, well, cinder blocks. I found like I started looking on Pinterest for like very easy DIY gardens that could be easily removed and taken down in the event that like we do get swept or like the city wasn't going to be okay with it or whatever it was. Because initially the strategy was to like build it and ask for forgiveness later.
Always.
Yeah. I don't even know if I should be like revealing this publicly, but it's fine. It's okay.
It's fine. People need to know how to.
I think with gardening sometimes like when it comes to like guerrilla gardening, sometimes that's just how it goes. Yeah. But the reason I was so drawn to cinder blocks as a material was just the idea of like how easily it could be taken down, and also like they could just be used like homies will use those for their tents, for building up their structures, for weighing things down. So it was like, this is actually like useful to have, like even if for some reason we need to take the garden down. And then the idea of personalizing them felt really cool.
Yeah.
And we had a community barbecue to celebrate like our 2 years of being an encampment that's safe. And we had like a really cute like painting party, and everyone was like spray painting the blocks. And that was like such a fun element of it, to just like get people involved in that way. Yeah. And it's like kind of become like a sacred space, like nobody touches it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I did do a drawing just to show the homies what I was thinking. And also because I needed to know how many cinder blocks to get.
Right. So you have to plan it out.
I had to plan it out a bit, and I like planned it out in SketchUp, and then I showed it to them, and it was like kind of cool. Like it really goes to show how much like a drawing can like get people excited. Even just like printing out Pinterest precedent photos, like I feel like if I were to do that at school, it'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Why? And I mean, like aesthetically, like not the most pleasing thing, but like by showing them photos, it was like, oh, that's super cool. I love that. Oh, we could paint these, or like maybe we could do this, and maybe we can build a bench. Yeah, that was really cute. Yeah.
That's so great to hear. And who installed the garden?
The community did, actually the same day as the party that we had. We like kind of all got together, and there's like 3 or 4 of us. We just like went and built the garden.
Nice.
And it was actually very quick once we like got it going. Yeah.
That's really amazing. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts and reflections in terms of like if landscape architecture and landscape architects were to actually shift more towards serving community. Because you kind of like experienced, I don't want to go in terms of like extremes, but like, you know, you have this like complete community driven, like everything is happening on their own, collecting your own materials, like your free kind of like design labor and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the super rigid, get permit A if you move this tree, if you do this. And it's just like, what do you think in terms of actually understanding parks as serving community? How do you think the profession should shift, or some of the things that could change?
I think just like as human beings, we should be working on like connecting with our wider communities more. And I feel like there could be a way to even start like, I mean, it's weird to say teaching it, but like maybe I have to say teaching it. Like just like developing listening skills and like empathy, and just kind of like developing like how do we foster relationships and kinship with one another. I think that's like the biggest thing that we can do as designers. And then like, I don't know, it is so different to like go by the books. I feel like especially in Vancouver, I feel like there's so many rules here. Which kind of like stifle.
It's made so people don't do things.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because I think like if we were to allow community to have a little bit more input in a more organic way, or like if you want to build a garden, it's a really easy process, then I think we'd be seeing a lot cooler spaces in the city.
You mean the developers wouldn't be taking over everything?
Well, like that's a whole other thing. I think like there does need to be a lot more. We need to like stop relying on developers to build public spaces, because that's not what they're interested in.
That's not it.
Like they'll do it begrudgingly, and
because
like
they have to.
Yeah, and like they won't fully invest in like creating like the best possible public space, and they're not going to invest in a community engagement process. They're going to like put a public art thing in a plaza and be like, we did it.
Call it a day.
Yeah.
And then proceed to put a bunch of things so that people can't actually access that space anyways.
Yeah. They'll put some anti-homelessness things in there and probably heavily guard it. And yeah.
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 Yeah, I think the other thing too that I wanted to talk to you about, because you have like such a first-hand experience in witnessing parks be homes for people.
Yeah.
And we often don't talk about landscape architecture as a response to housing solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because this is a conversation that stays within architecture.
Yeah.
We talk about landscape architecture as like housing, like animals and like plants and that, right? Like we understand this is the framework we operate within, right?
Yep.
But can you talk a little bit more about like how have you seen landscape architecture serving or like parks and open spaces serving as homes and housing?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing it in almost every public space, like throughout Canada. Like I've been engaging with other professionals in the country, and we're seeing like even in rural areas, people are camping in public spaces to survive. And like that's where we come in. But we never talked about that in school. I guess it maybe wasn't like that big of a thing a couple of years ago.
But it was also a problem to solve.
Yeah. But I think like, yes, architecture should be involved in this and housing should be built. But there's like this interim moment where like people are going to use public space because they have nowhere else to go. And that's where the kind of the only place that they can be. And we need to talk about that. And we're not talking about it like at all. We're just kind of like ignoring it or trying to push it away, or trying to focus on the other living beings that exist in these spaces, which is great too. It's not to we need to create spaces for the bees and the birds.
Yeah.
But like the reality is like humans are living in public space right now, and there's a lot of them. And like we can't ignore it. And like that is where our field comes in. I haven't quite figured out like what that looks like, but I do know that like people are camping in these spaces when they become more established and there's like more communal areas that need to be built. Circulation needs to happen. Like there's all these things that we would think about if we were doing a site analysis. It's just happening in a maybe differently organized way, but it's happening organically. And how do we help facilitate that? Because like, yeah, like the homies have decided a certain circulation at Crab. It's like, right. Well, like maybe if I like look at this from my landscape lens, like I understand why you're doing this. Maybe we suggest another path, or like maybe I could have maybe strongly suggested that the garden go in another place that was closer to water. But there's also, I guess, a bit of a push and pull there because it's like how much agency do you also like want to give your community? But like I know some things.
You
maybe it can be helpful.
You went to school for these things.
Yeah.
But I think that you're right. But it is important to also acknowledge that there is knowledge embedded in their lived experience as people who use that space, as community members, so that like like even the biggest thing for me, also even just leaving grad school, is like to be like, okay, this knowledge that was passed on to me, is this actually something that I want to continue trusting and operating by?
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is meant to perpetuate certain like ideologies that are not great, very oppressive based, very elitist. So sometimes even like when we think, it's like, why was I told that this is the right way?
Well, yeah.
Is it the right way?
Yeah. Yes. And some interesting discourse that I started seeing actually in Seattle was like people who are fighting to keep their parks free of unhoused folks under the guise of like, they'll say park equity, that like we all deserve access to the park.
Except the people.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Equity.
like by them camping in the park, it is therefore now difficult for other people to access these spaces. And like taxpayers should have access to all these things because they're paying money for it. Which like
on
also
stolen land.
Yes. Yes. And also,
Please.
like, it's a giant myth that unhoused people don't pay taxes. Like, please. They're just as much as a part of the
Correct.
system as everyone else is. Like, enough. Drives me nuts. Like, they are equally as invested in this community as anyone else is. They might be paying less taxes, but they are contributing to the same thing. But yeah, like, this word equity has been kind of used a lot from the other side of this discourse, which I found really interesting. Like, yes, of course, everyone deserves access to public space, but also, like, as a community, if we are seeing a group of us, like, struggling, why, like, it feels wild to me that, like, you're trying to help those people out. Instead, we're just like, no, I just don't want to see it. I don't want to deal with it. That can help it happen elsewhere.
There's the tax thing, which also we all know that the wealthiest don't pay taxes. So that also should not be a reason. But we're not even going to get into that.
Completely different conversation.
Yes, for another day. But also there's the perceived public safety of it all, right? Because a lot of times people are dealing with addiction issues and just dealing with the stresses of living in such harsh conditions that people perceive them as being very dangerous. And I've spoken to people and they're like, I understand their worries. They're like, well, I have my child. If I cannot expect how this person is going to act like, I don't have time to have this understanding, which I'm like, okay, fair, I understand.
Totally.
But what would you say to people who have those worries? Because it's also not always the case that just because somebody's dealing with mental health issues that they're actually are going to hurt you.
Yeah. I feel like, and like this is purely anecdotal, but like in my experiences of doing mutual aid over the last few years, I've dealt with like maybe one or two outbursts and I never felt personally unsafe, but like that's not to say that like there are definitely situations in this work that like you could feel unsafe for sure. Like I think that's just, it's always a risk. But like more often than not, like that's just not like it's. I feel like that's just a giant like stigma or like stereotype. But I wouldn't say that happens a whole lot. And at least in my experiences with Crab, if anybody has an outburst or if there is something going on, like the community calls them in because there's a park. There's a kids park at Crab, and it happened once when I was there where like a guy was like really mad and he was about to like go walk off and like get madder, and the community was like, no, get back in here. There's kids over there. Like, check yourself.
Yeah.
Like, we understand that you're going through these feelings, but like, let's try and like do this in a safer place that's safe for everyone. But yeah, it is such like it is a reality. Like a lot of folks who are unhoused are dealing with pretty severe mental health issues or addiction issues or whatever it is.
Yeah. I actually, I think last night there was a meme that said something like, we criminalize unhoused folks because they don't have the privacy to experience their outbursts. But we all have our moments.
Completely.
How many people are busy getting completely wasted and then like acting fools? But they have the privilege and the privacy of their homes or wherever they are.
Well, that's it.
It's not happening in the public eye.
Yeah. Like you try having a panic attack outside. It's going to suck.
Yeah. Yeah.
You try like sleeping every day in the elements on a day like today when it's raining. Everything's getting wet. All of your stuff is constantly needing to be replaced because it's either getting wet or snowed on or like it's too hot to be in your tent. Like who wouldn't have an outburst? Like I remember like at some people, and I've like unpacked this with a lot of folks who like, they don't like giving money to unhoused folks because they're going to go spend it on drugs. And I'm like, first of all, you're going to go spend it on drugs.
Correct.
Like, let's be real here.
Yeah.
But also like, so what if they do? You try living in a tent. all the time. Like, yeah, like I would maybe want to get stoned to like have to deal with very cold weather or just like get through the night. And like, I don't know, anyone who's tried camping like knows sometimes sleeping is hard. Like, I don't know, there's like so much weird stigma where it's like, well, it's okay for me, but like it's not okay for the poor person down the street that doesn't have a house.
Yeah, it's just straight up dehumanizing.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you can't afford them the grace that you would afford anybody else.
Yeah.
Just because they're going through poverty.
Yeah. And their entire lives are like in public. Everything is out for the world to see. Like they have no privacy.
Yeah.
That sucks.
And the worst part of it all, too, is like the demographics of people who find themselves in these situations
Yep.
are often people of color. Like Indigenous and Black people are the highest represented people in the unhoused community.
Yeah.
Even though we don't make up
Yeah.
a high percentage of the population otherwise. So
Yeah.
even just understanding how these things are actually designed to be exactly this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty sad.
Yeah, it's hard. The homeless count hasn't come out yet for this year. I was a part of it. It happened in March. Numbers should be out soon, but the numbers from 2020 showed that 30% of unhoused folks are Indigenous in Vancouver.
Man.
So like a staggeringly high number in terms of like population. But like, yeah, it like speaks to like Canada as a whole in this very small part of Vancouver.
Yeah. This is ongoing colonialism.
Yeah. It's like active genocide. Like this is,
this is it. This is what it looks like today.
yeah. And it's like just a few blocks away from us. It's yeah. I know. We can like go real deep into this. There's so many different directions we could go.
There's so many different directions we could go. I think we're going to have a second part of this discussion because I do want to wrap it up soon. But before we kind of like close out the discussion, is there anything else that you would like to mention, given your experience? Stuff that people should really just consider when, one, they're like interacting in public space, interacting with unhoused communities, or even as designers, like even though you're not necessarily designing just for the unhoused community, but how do you design so that your designs are inclusive and friendly?
I think it's community care. I think it's caring, like showing love and care through community, and like that can look in whatever way like fits for your, like you don't necessarily need to engage with unhoused folks. Like there are so many other things that are going on in the city that like you can get involved in, but like getting to know your direct community and your neighbors, and investing in those relationships, I think is like the only way forward. Not only as designers, but just like
Any human.
in the climate crisis apocalypse world that we're in right now. Like as a means for survival, I think it's really important to be like fostering connections with our direct communities and like really like understanding what it means to be a neighbor. Like not in like a Christian sense, just like as neighbors, like what do we do to like build networks and like build a capacity so that like collectively we can be better. I think that's like the number one suggestion that I have for designers. Like take your design head out of that for a minute and just like learn what it means to like connect with the people around you. And that like it doesn't need to be like a volunteer thing that like you check off your list. Like if it becomes an integrated part of your life, and the same with like self-care does, and like you invest in your family and friends, I think that it could just enrich us as human beings. Yeah, and like I think that, I don't know if we like circle back to school and how like it felt a little isolating at times. Like I think, gosh, how cool would it be if like schools were teaching students like to care, and like if a core part of curriculum was like to just like go do things in community. I think that it would just like make such a difference in the world.
100%.
Yeah. And I think like engagement is really important, but like meaningful engagement is key. Like we can't not just like checking off the box, like
and not proceed to not even do the things that community told you.
Like when you're in these meetings, consulting with people, like really, truly, genuinely, like get to know them. I remember like I took a Indigenous community planning class at SCARP at UBC, and I think her name is Jessie Hemphill. She's a community consultant, and she's Indigenous, and she taught us like we got into her class and like she just had like pictures all over the table and she had us like pick a picture and then like talk about it. And she wanted us to just like share how we were doing and who we were. And just like it took all of 15, 20 minutes for us to like go through that. But like I felt so bonded with all of these people that I'd been going to class with. But like this was my first time like actually listening to a shared experience and having stories. And then like I developed really beautiful friendships that I continue to have today because like we connected as humans for 20 minutes.
What a crazy thing to do.
Like mind-blowing, but like I remember just being like, whoa, like this is so important. Why aren't we doing this all the time?
I always say that it's so weird that in the Western world, community building is something that we have to teach. And
it's so weird.
Come on. Like, you've really lost the plot if you gotta be taught that. But that's it is super weird. Like it's like if you're basically like teaching people to be human. Like, to operate at the level at which we actually intrinsically are meant to be operating at.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, but yeah, I don't know. Like I grew up like as an Anglo in Quebec, and like we had a small community there. And I guess maybe that's where I like learned the importance of like networks of care through different people. But even then, I feel like I don't know. It just feels so weird to me that we are so disengaged from like the people around us on a daily basis. Yeah. Go talk to people.
You heard it here first.
Oh my God.
I think this is a good place for us to wrap up. My tradition is to have my guests ask me a question in closing. So is there anything you'd like to ask me?
Oh my gosh, this is like, wow.
This is why I don't tell you in advance so you don't prepare.
Okay.
You also don't have to ask a question.
No, I feel like I should ask a question. I'm just like, can't believe that I'm stumped right now. It's like as if I've never spoken to you before.
So many options.
What do you think has been like maybe a highlight or like a really good moment of your 2023 so far? I don't know if that's too personal of a question for your podcast.
No, it's not. If you listen, you're going to hear. I'm not going to lie to you. This year has been fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like I've encountered so much hardship this year.
Yeah.
But it also has been a recall to recentering and like really just thinking about how to protect myself. So I wouldn't like I don't really believe that we need to go through such hardships to learn these things.
Yeah.
Hopefully those lessons could have come in easier ways.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think in terms of like life in general, that's kind of been the theme. And I think reflecting on that is tied to me being a Black woman.
Yeah.
And living in this society. But like being like specifically speaking though, I am also just like there's been a lot of great things that have happened. One being that we launched the design cipher, and that was like
That's amazing.
that was probably one of the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my life, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm still too tired. Like, I haven't had time to actually feel it.
Yeah.
But it was really life-changing. I mean, it came after 3 years of hard work and just like nonstop going. And like, I mean, up till the day off, we were just like,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
and also there's a vision that you have, and then there's the reality of things. And sometimes you think that the vision is the best thing, and the reality actually ends up being the best thing, even though it doesn't live up to the vision.
Yeah.
So all these lessons have been really great.
Yeah.
But I would say that the design cipher and just like seeing the students be so excited, and like just witnessing how extremely intelligent these Black and Indigenous youth are.
Yeah.
And like they come up with projects that are better thought out than projects from my students in university, in grad school. I'm not saying it. It's true.
Yeah.
And like
I believe it.
because their lived experience is different. So when you go through life holding certain identities and holding certain struggles, it means that your way of thinking is different.
Yeah.
This isn't to say that the other people aren't smart. It just means that they have a little bit more privilege, that there are a lot of things that they don't think about. And so this is why these what I would say, these kids' projects in some sense are richer, not more skillful. No, definitely not. But richer.
And that's way more important.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, that's so great. I'm so proud of you. I know it's been like a rough year, but like
Hish.
but like the design cipher is so cool, and it's so special that you accomplished that this year.
Yeah, it was a lot of hard work. Shout out to Sierra, JB, Crystal, and all the people in the community who've supported us. We're still going at it.
Yeah.
You know, it's still a lot of hard work, but it's got to be done. It's got to be done.
Yeah. And like we need it.
Absolutely.
We need it desperately. So, yeah. Thank you for doing it.
It is my life's calling. One of them. Because, you know, I have plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You exist in multiples.
You're going to expose me in public. Oh, Mariah. Thank you, Michelle, for this. We're going to wrap it up.
Okay. All right.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Design Unmuted podcast. Please share this with someone who you think might find this valuable. Don't forget to subscribe and support at remeshadesign.com/designunmuted. You can follow me on Instagram at designunmuted to stay up to date with all the things I'm working on.